Today is July 27th, 2023. My name is Sue Paul, and I am at the Warhawk Air Museum in Nampa, Idaho, conducting a Veterans History Project interview in conjunction with the Library of Congress. Today we have the honor of interviewing Ivan Bishop, and I want to welcome you to the Warhawk Air Museum. It's truly an honor to have you spend this time with us. Thank you. Also present in the room is Allie Hill, who will be doing our photography work. Ivan, could you give us your date of birth?
My date of birth is August the 12th, 1940.
And the branch of service in which you served?
The U.S. Navy Reserve.
And the highest rank that you attained?
Lieutenant.
And the war or conflict in which you served?
It was during the Vietnam era.
Thank you. Ivan, you were born in Lamar, Colorado in 1940. Where is Lamar, Colorado?
It's in the extreme southeast corner, very close to the Kansas and Oklahoma borders.
Okay. Was it a large town or small?
Not particularly, no.
Yeah.
And I kind of grew up in very small towns.
Okay. Did you grow up in Lamar?
No. I'm born there, but before long moved around and lived in Garden City, Kansas for a while, and then from about the second grade through the fifth grade in a little town called Bristol, Colorado. It's right on the Kansas border, and the population of Bristol was 100.
What was second grade like?
It was a little schoolhouse, and we had rows, and one row was the first grade, the second grade, the third grade, and the teacher would go down the rows and give an assignment and then go to the next row.
Oh, my word. Wow.
I was there through the halfway through the fifth grade,
Okay.
and then moved to Texas.
Okay. What did your dad do for a living?
He managed alfalfa mills where they went and cut the hay in the field, brought it in, and warmed it up in big cylinders with natural gas, turned it into meal, and then pellets for cattle feed.
So he worked for one company
One
that
company called
contracted all over the country?
National Alfalfa they had.
Oh,
So
okay.
they transferred him down to Hereford, Texas when I was 10 years old.
Okay. And you have brothers and sisters?
A sister
Okay.
who was 5 years older than me.
All right. You're the baby of the family.
Yeah. And my parents were dryland farmers in the Oklahoma Panhandle during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl.
Did they ever talk about that with you?
Not much, because they said they lived it. They didn't want to talk
Yeah,
about it.
really?
It was pretty bad.
Yeah. No, it's a story in itself. It is. So that wasn't a part of your life?
No,
then as a
because
kid?
they had to move into Lamar, where I was born, because my sister turned out to be a type 1 diabetic, and there was no electricity on the farms then, and you have to refrigerate insulin. So they had to move into a town, and he had to get a job.
Okay, okay. And so then you grew up in a little town in Texas.
Yes.
And what was the name of that?
I lived in Hereford for several years, halfway through my junior year. Then I moved to another little town just 50 miles away called Muleshoe.
Mm-hmm. And what did you like doing during high school years, your teenage years?
Well, did you ever see the movie American Graffiti?
Of course.
That was us.
Yeah.
Drag Main Street and then go get a burger and fries.
Yeah, that is quite a film.
And you always had the radio on.
Always.
And you listened to KOA Denver or some AM station 1,000 miles
So
away.
what was your favorite music?
And they were always playing the top
10.
The top 10 or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
They started at the top 30 maybe.
So was it hard to leave your junior year and move to another town?
Yes, because I was left all my friends. I thought I'd never have another friend. I developed friends in Muleshoe that I've stayed in touch with until they died.
So when you moved to, you were what, 16 maybe, 17 when you moved there?
Yeah,
Yeah, and so
halfway through my junior year.
So you did make friends then?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Lifetime friends.
Okay.
And the reason is not those 18 months. It was that we all went off to Texas Tech.
Oh, when you graduated from high school. What did you want to do when you graduated from high school?
I wanted to get out of Texas.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get a degree, but I wanted to see the world, and that's why I succumbed to the Navy, join the Navy and see the world.
Did you go to college first, though, before you joined
yes.
them? Okay, where did you go?
Texas Tech.
Texas Tech, okay. And what was your focus there?
Well, I started majoring in architecture,
Okay.
and after a year and a half, I decided I was more interested in deep thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And my back was sore from standing at drafting tables
Mm-hmm.
because I have a back condition. So I changed my major to philosophy.
Mm-hmm. That's a very difficult
And one
major.
day I was walking across the campus and I thought to myself, nobody's going to hire me to be a philosopher. So I decided to move into the business school and graduated with a degree in marketing.
Okay. Wow, okay. Now, Vietnam War, where was that in your life at that point before you joined the Navy?
Vietnam was hardly on anybody's radar
Okay.
when I joined the Navy. What was on everybody's radar was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I joined, was in the middle of that crisis,
Mm-hmm.
October of '62. I was still a senior in college, but when you join the Navy to go to officer candidate school, you join during your senior year, and it's contingent on getting the degree.
Okay.
Then I went on to Newport, Rhode Island to go through officer candidate school. And I'd like to say that I joined because of a wave of patriotism, because of the missile crisis and the Navy's role in it.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is I wanted to see the world.
So why pick the Navy to see the world?
To see the world because I was surrounded by Army and Air Force bases, and I didn't want to get sent back to
Okay.
West Texas,
Right.
which
right.
is the most unscenic place you can imagine.
Yeah, ever. Yeah, and there's no water.
Yeah.
So you joined the Navy, and so you finished your senior year, and when you graduated, then you were in the Navy, and
Went off to
and you
Newport.
went to officer school. Okay.
4 months.
Where did you go from?
Newport, Rhode Island.
And how were you involved right away with the Cuban crisis? I mean, that was
Oh,
a
not
pretty
at all.
uptight, tense time for
No,
our
a
country.
lot of people were, but I was in the school all the time.
Okay, okay. Anybody in your family in the military before
My
you?
dad was in Army ROTC,
Okay.
but due to the Depression,
Uh-huh.
he was unable to finish his senior year. He had to
Yeah.
go back and help his father
Yeah,
run the farm
okay.
because he couldn't hire employees on the farm in the Depression. There was no money.
There's no
So-
money at all. Yeah.
So he would have been a second lieutenant if he'd have graduated
Okay.
in the Army, but didn't happen.
Yeah.
That gave me some inspiration
Mm-hmm.
to become an officer, but I didn't want to go in the Army and get sent back to West Texas.
You were so you were 5 years old when World War II ended, 1945. Do you have any recollection at all? I know.
Oh, yeah.
What? Tell us about that.
Well, when I was a kid, there was 3 things we did in this little town of 100. We played baseball unorganized on vacant lots. We played Cowboys and Indians and worshiped Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, or we played war.
Mm-hmm.
We dug trenches and had rifles and shot at each other, all fake, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But we were very familiar with the war.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And playing war was fun because we knew it just ended, but
Mm-hmm.
those are the 3 things we did.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, that's my husband's era. Believe me, I know. We have a house full of memorabilia from those years. Okay, so you decided to go in the Navy. Did you know what you wanted to do when you were in the Navy, besides travel the world?
You don't have any choice.
You don't.
I filled out a dream sheet,
Okay.
which everybody does when you start at officer candidate school. You fill out a dream sheet.
Okay.
And due to books that I'd read and movies that I'd seen, I had a predisposition towards destroyers and the Pacific Ocean and Hawaii, Honolulu. And I thought weapons is interesting. So I selected destroyers, Pearl Harbor, and weapons. I got Norfolk, Virginia, communications, and an oiler.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it works in the Navy.
Yeah, it's not your choice.
Somewhere there's a computer whirring,
Yeah,
and that's what it was.
it tosses it out.
But let me mention the most dramatic thing when I got my commission. The day I got my commission, you throw your hat in the air, and there's a bunch of enlisted men lined up to get a silver dollar, and you have to have a pocket full of silver dollars. And when they salute you, it's the first time you've ever been saluted, so you give them a silver dollar, and they know it, so they're out there getting the dollars. Then I was sent to a communications school right there on that base. So I went over to the Navy Exchange and got a cheap, because I had no money, a portable radio. Took it over the officers' quarters, and there's this little Spartan room with a desk and a bed. And I set this little portable radio up, knowing no stations. I turned the on switch, and it said, "The president has just been shot in Dallas, Texas."
Gosh.
Of course, everybody remembers
Of course, exactly
where
where
they
you
were
are. Yeah.
when that happened, and that's what I was doing. Is I turned the radio on, and it said, "The president has just been shot."
And
in
what was
Dallas,
your
Texas."
first thought as a Navy officer?
I had no idea what what was going to happen. No idea.
Yeah. Yeah, and so how did that affect you? Immediately in your service?
Didn't affect me at all, except everybody remembers
Yeah,
where they were
of course.
when they heard that.
Yeah.
The reason is it was a big deal.
Well, yeah, the president was killed.
So
Yeah, every one of us, I remember
So
exactly.
I went through a school that lasted 2 months, as I recall, and you learned how to be a communication officer, but also a registered publications custodian. Very important job because you got all the codes, the secret stuff. And you have to maintain a whole bunch of different manuals that they send you updates to, and you do page checking. It's very time-consuming work, and then when you get aboard a ship, it's all locked in safes, and you're one of the few people that use the machines that decode classified
machines,
messages.
yeah.
So they come in garbled, and you sit down using World War II type stuff.
Right.
It's all primitive compared to today, and
The
you load
coding
these
machines,
cylinders
yeah.
and set the
Wow.
codes for the day, and then you key in the codes, and the English translation comes out.
Did you like doing that work?
Not necessarily, a lot of responsibility,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I preferred other aspects of the job, which was managing the signalmen, the electronics technicians, and the radiomen. And that was back in the day of Morse code. This is primitive stuff by today's standards, so it was that sort of stuff.
Right.
And all of my people were wearing earphones and doing dot on those little keys. That's primitive.
Right.
Today everything is
Oh, yeah.
high tech.
Right, right.
So
But
I don't even know.
that was the
I
state,
don't
that was,
even know.
that was
what
the
it would
state
be
of the
like.
art, at the time that you were in. And so how long before you were given a ship?
Oh, I had my ship assignment at the beginning, but I
Did
had to
you?
go to this communication school before reporting aboard, and it was in Norfolk. So I go down there with some buddies that were in the same class, and they also had Norfolk as their assignment, so we all went down in the same car. And then when I reported aboard ship, within very few days, we left for the Mediterranean. And those are 6-month tours in the Mediterranean.
And is this your ship that you were assigned to?
Yes, it was
Yes.
an oiler.
Let's show this, and a very handsome picture of you. And so this is called the Shangri-La. This is the aircraft carrier, correct? And do you know what the airplanes were on it?
No.
And
But
then,
the Oilers, let me just say, Oilers are named after rivers.
oh,
And the Marias River is, I believe, in Montana. And each one's given a number, and AO stands for auxiliary oiler, and the 57 was just a number. There was a whole bunch of Oilers. Now, today, one ship handles oil, ammunition, and supplies, but in those days, there was an oiler, an ammunition ship, and a supply ship. So the ships in the fleet had to be serviced by 3 separate ships where you'd pull alongside and transfer weapons, oil, aviation gas, mail, all that kind of stuff.
and so your ship carried weapons,
Just
oil.
But
Just
it was
oil.
later that they consolidated it into one big mammoth ship, much later.
Okay, but
But in
on
those days, it took 3 ships.
3
So
ships.
if you're on any kind of a ship, you had to pull alongside an oiler for gas, then you pull alongside a supply ship for food and stuff, and then an ammunition ship for ammunition. And those transfers from ship to ship are tricky.
Okay.
And
How did you transfer oil to the aircraft
you
carrier?
can barely see them on there, but they're big hoses.
I see the
this big
hoses,
around.
yeah.
So you fire a line across, and then the people on the other ship pull it until the hose comes across, and they hook it up, and you start pumping oil.
And so you traveled for 18 months on this ship?
Yes.
And were you always with the same aircraft carrier?
No.
Okay.
different. I was in what was called the Sixth Fleet, as I recall, and it was the Mediterranean. The objective was to let Khrushchev know that don't mess with the Mediterranean, that's ours. It was the Cold War.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We just had the missile crisis.
Right.
And it was a lot of contention between the Soviet Union and
right.
The U.S.
Yeah.
And
so the coding must have been pretty darn
well, there was a lot
important and very had to be really protected, because that was a very, difficult time, very dangerous time in those relationships, wasn't it?
and to do this, I had to have a top secret cryptographic clearance. So the FBI went back to Muleshoe, Texas, and interviewed a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Did you like being on board a ship?
I learned a lot and got a lot of experience. The main thing that I think back about was I was very young and hadn't matured, and I matured very, very fast because I was in charge of people. At times I was in charge of the ship, and the responsibilities were heavy. And what you do during that time is you really grow up and mature. So I had a whole new level of experience that later really served me well, because I immediately was able to benefit when I was in charge of people as a civilian, because I'd had leadership responsibilities.
Yeah.
And just to mention one thing, I'm so thankful that when I grew up there was no television or video games, so I was a big reader. And if I hadn't been, I wouldn't have graduated from OCS, because they planned to fail the bottom 10%. And it was all how fast can you read and how much can you retain, and then they give you a test the next day. And they gave you more than you could possibly read. So they were interested in failing people that couldn't read fast and retain. And if I'd grown up with TV and video games, I don't think I could have graduated. Today's kids are suffering from that.
Oh, yeah.
They really are.
Well, so the military has to make up for it in some other way.
Yeah, listen to what they say about the military.
Yeah.
The kids that are going to the military are
Yeah.
deficient in all the skills that used to be
Right.
given, but our educational system is letting people down.
So for 18 months, you were on the same ship, and primarily in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean Sea. What were your designations? Why were you traveling in that area? I mean, you explained why the Mediterranean, it was
Well,
important
the Mediterranean
for Khrushchev
was a
to
big
know.
part of the Cold War.
Yeah.
But that was only 6 months. I also went down to Aruba in South America,
Oh,
just
really?
on a lot of the Navy activities are just for training purposes and getting everybody on the ship. You can't just sit in port. You got to be out on the ocean.
Yeah.
So we went to Aruba. We went to some of the islands in the Caribbean. And one time I participated in the largest amphibious training exercise since World War II. And they got a whole big fleet of amphibious ships and warships, and we went to the coast of Spain. The name of that operation, I think, was Steel Pike or something like that. I've forgotten, but it was huge. So those are just some of the things that we did.
All in preparation for any attack.
It's all about
being
training.
Prepared. Yeah.
And the experience that you go through as any officer, regardless of whether you're in weapons, communications, whatever, you stand deck watches as the junior officer of the deck until you're qualified as the officer of the deck. And then when you're the officer of the deck, you have a junior officer assigned to you, and you stand 1 in 4 watches usually on a ship of that size. Aren't that many officers. And of course the captain doesn't stand watches, and the executive officer doesn't stand watches, and the supply officers don't stand watches.
What do you do when you stand watch? I
You're in
always
charge.
heard that expression.
You're in charge of the ship, subject to some of the captain's rules, like you don't change course without his permission, you don't change speed without his permission, and you inform him of any radar contact that has any constant bearing and decreasing range. In other words, if something isn't done, you're going to run into each other. You have to call, even if he's asleep. If you have the midwatch from 12 to 4, you still call the captain if there's a blip on the radar that's it's the same bearing and they're getting closer. Because if one of the two doesn't change, you're going to run into each other. So you call the captain. They get awakened at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, whatever it is. So.
And so you're in the cabin then?
You're in the cabin, and
the whole time. Okay.
You're completely
Watching
in charge of everything.
That's a huge responsibility.
The only experience I had that today I look back on it, it's funny. It wasn't funny at the time. My starboard lookout. They're out there all the time with the binoculars looking out. I have one on the starboard side, one on the port side, and the starboard watchman said, "Submarine dead ahead." And this was on my very first watch as officer of the deck. This captain had just signed the letter that I was qualified. So I run as fast as I can out to the starboard wing. And myself and the lookout, I got my binoculars up. We look, and all of a sudden this thing that looks like a submarine shoots water 50 feet in the air, and we knew it was a whale. But it was so close I was going to T-bone it. And the bow of the ship has sonar equipment in it that's pretty delicate, and I didn't know what a whale could do as damage. I wasn't too concerned if I had to kill the whale, but I didn't want it to damage that equipment. And I had no time to call the captain and get permission. I was going to hit it in just seconds practically. So I ran back through the bridge and said, "Hard right rudder as fast as I could." And the guy that has the big wheel turned the rudder to starboard, so that took the stern of the ship and pulled it this way, so I'd hit the whale at a glancing blow. So I'm standing out on the port wing looking downward. I didn't change the speed because it takes the speed for the rudder to have any effect. So I'm looking down from the port wing down on this whale who's coming down the side of the ship. And it's during the day. The captain was awake. So he runs up to the port wing, up the stairway, and comes out beside me, and he's looking down. And just as he and I are looking down, the whale spouts water on us. So I turned to the captain. We're standing there dripping wet, and water's running off our caps. And I said, "Captain, I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to call you, but I was afraid the whale could hurt the sonar equipment." And he looked at me and he said, "I think you did the right thing, Ensign." And I saluted him. He saluted me back.
Both dripping wet.
No one will ever know if the whale would have hurt the equipment. But the captain thought it was a smart thing to do.
It sure sounds like it was.
Looking back on it, it's funny. As it was happening, it was not.
Yeah, you were a very serious young man. How old were you when you did that happen?
23.
Yeah, very young. Lots of
Like I said, it gives
responsibility.
you maturity at a fairly young age that you wouldn't get as a civilian. If I'd gone into a civilian job after college, I wouldn't have had that kind of responsibility.
No, yeah,
So it really caused me to,
yeah.
which helped me. I went back to graduate school because they passed the Cold War bill. On my next tour, which we haven't talked about, as I was evaluating, what am I going to do now? And I thought, wait a minute, they'll pay me to go to school. So I went back to Texas Tech, got a job in the active reserves as a recruiter on campus. So I got income from the Navy Reserve during my year at getting my master's degree.
So that was for 1 year. You were a Navy recruiter at
Texas Tech.
At Texas Tech,
But that's after another tour.
right, because you had another 18 months. What is
shore
the
duty.
Beach Group 2? What is that?
Commander of Naval Beach Group 2 was an administrative command over 3 elements of the amphibious Navy. The beach masters, they're the people that go ashore early on and then direct all the traffic coming in from the big ships. And the assault craft unit, which maintains some of the assault craft that come in. These aren't the little Higgins boats. These are the things that carry a couple tanks or big trucks or something. And then the third group, as I recall, was a particular kind of amphibious vehicle that carried supplies and stuff to the shore. And as the communication officer, I had to inspect their communication equipment and occasionally in staff meetings help write amphibious war plans having to do with frequencies and stuff like that. And it was an interesting tour. It was at Little Creek, Virginia.
But were you on the water at all
No.
then? No, okay.
Strictly training. Then an administrative command turns them over to tactical commands and war situations. So the guy in charge of the command is just for maintenance and training and that kind of stuff. And then they turn it over to the people that might take them to war. And during Vietnam, even though we were in Virginia, they sent a few of our people through the Panama Canal to Vietnam because they were short of that skill set.
Tell us about Vietnam. What were you hearing about it, the in-country
Well, as I was
experiences that were going on?
As I was aboard ship decoding classified messages, one of the messages was, we want officers with small boat experience to volunteer for Vietnam. They wanted them on the rivers. So they were looking for people that as civilians had small boat experience. That's why Kennedy did that sort of stuff. He grew up with yachts, so. And Kennedy wrote a famous book before he was ever president about those small craft that he handled during World War II. So I had no background with boats at all, but I also had my orders for my last tour, and I thought, I don't really want to jeopardize everything that's going well, so I just went to the Little Creek. But I knew that Vietnam was beginning to heat up.
Yeah, you must have been hearing about it. I mean, in the service.
I knew it was heating up.
Yeah.
Then when I was at Little Creek, they passed the GI Cold War bill, or whatever it was called, that would pay you to go to school. So I happen to know today that these are enormous amounts of money, but then it was $100 a month, which sounds like nothing.
Right.
But then $100 a month was quite a little bit of money. Today it would take $1,000 to have any meaning whatsoever. But so I had my reserve income as an active recruiter and that, and then they made me a teaching assistant because of my maturity. And I was really into the academic study of marketing as opposed to when I was 22 years old and wanted to have fun while I was in college.
Well, right.
With all that maturity, I was doing so well in the classes, they asked me to be a teaching assistant.
And you were still Navy Reserve?
Still Navy Reserve. And went on one reserve cruise to Alaska. When I wasn't in school, it was between semesters. I went up to, I was on a destroyer that we went up to Alaska for 2 weeks.
Now, had you gotten married or met somebody yet in your life? So you were still
Not yet.
Footloose and fancy free,
Footloose
huh?
and fancy free.
Yeah. Okay. And so, when you made a decision then not to stay in for life at some point? And
Well, yeah, that was.
had you ever
I
intended
was
as a
looking
possibility?
I was looking at 3 options.
Okay.
I could stay in the Navy. The FBI was all over our area looking for people to be FBI agents because they had criteria that they wanted certain people, and one of them was naval officers, so they were looking for FBI agents. And at the time, that didn't appeal to me because at that time, the reason they needed so many agents was to escort black children to desegregated schools in the South.
Right.
And I thought, that doesn't, I'd like to solve crimes. I wouldn't want to do that so much. And then the Cold War bill turned me towards graduate school.
Yeah. So fate just kind of took over and took you on the journey that you went. Yeah. Yeah. What did you see on the home front with our guys and gal, the Vietnam veterans, being treated the way they were? Did you see any of that?
When I got out of graduate school, my first job, I wanted to be a computer salesman, so I interviewed all the companies that were selling computers. And the one that attracted me wanted me in San Diego. So I'd been in Norfolk, the biggest naval port on the East Coast. Now I go out to San Diego, and I thought, this is nice. Palm trees,
Like
wonderful
this
weather.
weather,
I liked it.
yeah.
So I took that job mainly because of San Diego, and they wanted me because they had a hot prospect to buy a giant computer at the Naval Electronics Lab in San Diego, and I knew the acronyms.
Yeah, of course, the
The Navy-
computers were the size of this room in those
Yes.
days.
Oh, no, this room wouldn't hold
Wouldn't hold.
a fifth. But the Navy is full of acronyms, and I knew them all because of being in communications. I could decode any acronym.
Wow.
But they must have a million. And so the salesman that was calling on Naval Electronics Lab didn't know any of that stuff. So I became his assistant to learn how to do that.
Okay.
And then they transferred me to Tucson, Arizona, because a super salesman had sold 4 giant systems, and they wanted to promote him to the home office in Minneapolis. But somebody had to take over those accounts. So they transferred me there, and I took over the University of Arizona and something called Kitt Peak National Observatory that was into astronomy.
Oh, boy.
And they all needed giant computers. And that's where I met my wife, Barbara, and got married and had 2 kids before I left.
Was she working?
Yes, she was working for a stockbroker, and it was right in the same building I was in. And I knew one of the stockbrokers from Texas Tech, and I knew that he was there, so I went down to say hello to him as soon as I found out that he was there, and I got moved into Tucson, and he introduced me to his secretary, and that was my wife.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And what year were you married?
71.
In 71. So you were in until 72. Is that correct? Is that what I'm saying? That's your reserves?
I was in the reserve for several years after
Yeah. The active.
being the recruiter. I think I'd signed up for a total of 7 or 8 years, something like that. So,
Yeah.
and it expired, and I couldn't be in the active reserves in Tucson. There's a lack of naval
Not too many Navy
facilities
people,
in Tucson,
Yeah,
Arizona.
no kidding. Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
What is a qualified officer of the deck underway? What does that mean? That was one of the special duties that you
Well,
had?
the captain has to agree that you're qualified for standing junior officer of the deck watches long enough, and then he signs a letter that goes in your jacket that says you're qualified. And on an oiler, there's another level that I never met, which was officer of the deck during refueling operations. That's far more complicated because of the danger of ships bumping together and stuff like that. Take a couple of ships bump together and the captains might wind up with a desk job. That's serious stuff. So they have the most skilled people possible, and I was working towards that level, but left before I could get there.
Okay.
I had an interesting experience, though. When I was the junior officer of the deck, there was a time that, for training purposes, the officer of the deck gave me what's called the con, meaning you're the junior officer of the deck, but you're in charge. I can take that away from you in a second, but you're in charge. So you put on earphones and talk to the guy on the other ship that's in charge. And it was in the summer, and all the Naval Academy people flew over there and were assigned to ships for training purposes. So I put on the earphones, and the guy on the destroyer was Roger Staubach, the famous Dallas quarterback, but he was just a midshipman at the time. He was famous because of the Heisman Trophy, but only within the Navy. The world didn't know yet that he was the famous Dallas
Who he was.
Cowboy
Yeah.
quarterback.
Yeah. Did you know at the time when you were?
Oh, I had no idea what his future would hold. I just knew he had won the Heisman.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So you knew when you were talking to him
Yeah.
who he was.
it was just a brief chat. That's all.
How did you communicate in those years? How did you communicate?
Oh,
mean-
when you send the hoses over for fuel, you also send a line with colored flags to show the distance between the ships, and then you send phone lines over to talk.
Oh, phone
so
lines.
the two
Okay.
officer of the decks have got earphones on.
Okay.
And you put your best quartermaster at the wheel, because you got to
Oh yeah. Yeah.
be very steady.
Yeah.
And you got a ship on either side of you.
So you
complicated
decided to get out. You were married. You got married before you left the Navy?
No, I got
Yeah.
married after graduate school and
Oh.
moving to San Diego and moving back to Tucson.
Okay. So did you have a definite career you were moving toward by then?
I thought I wanted to stay in the computer world, but they sent me to the home office in Minneapolis to work on a proposal for Arizona State University. And I got subject to incredible cold, way below zero in Minneapolis while I was putting this proposal together. It was very complicated stuff. I thought, I don't want to live in Minneapolis. And that's where any promotional opportunities lay. So I looked into life insurance, real estate, and stock brokerage. Got licensed in all three and made my final decision, went into life insurance with Northwestern Mutual Life. And I thought, I can be an agent here in Tucson for the rest of my life, build up my renewal commissions and blah, 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 blah. But after 6 years of that, a guy approached me to go into management with Pacific Life out of Newport Beach. I thought, Newport Beach. But he wanted me to be a sales manager in his agency. And I thought, I'm really probably better at managing the operation rather than being a salesman for the rest of my life. So I took that job. We were doing so well, he got promoted to Dallas, and I was running the agency. And I was doing so well, they invited me into the home office as a vice president. So I retired 20 years ago as the vice president of product marketing at Pacific Life.
Now tell me why you liked the life insurance business.
I believed in it, and I believed that everybody needed probably more than they had. And I knew how to do it, and I knew how to train people how to do it. And because of my teaching experience at Texas Tech, I knew how to teach people. They called me the professor. When I went to Newport Beach, I was referred to as the professor because of my style of teaching, drawing pictures on the board and stuff like that. And I was very good at that. So they started sending me to all the agencies in the United States. I've been to every state in the United States putting on seminars.
My gosh.
And because you want to reward your best agents, I was in charge of our conferences. So I've been to
That's a big job.
I've been to Thailand, New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, Venice, Paris, London, you name it, everywhere. These were rewards for our leading producers.
So you wanted to join the Navy because you wanted to see the world.
And I saw more of the world with
And
Pacific
you,
Life.
and you saw a little tiny fraction of the world your first 18 months, and then you were home, and maybe once to Alaska and back. And it was afterwards that but because of everything that you had learned, and because of the person that you became, you were able to accomplish that in your private life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, when I retired in '03, I would like to take a little time to explain what I've done for veterans
Yes.
from that
Yes.
time
I
on.
wanted to ask that question.
I clipped a coupon out of a magazine to join the American Legion, having no knowledge of anything. And then I get something in the mail later that said, would you like to join a local post? And they gave me the name and phone number of the local post commander. So I called him. Of course, he was delighted to have somebody join the post. So I did join the Tustin Post 227. One side of it. I don't know which side it is. At any rate, they immediately were interested in me being in the color guard because I ran the color guard aboard ship. I was the one with the white formal uniform and the sword, and had the guys lined up behind me with the rifles, and we did that kind of stuff for visitors and dignitaries and everything. So I had the experience. So I got in the color guard, and then there was a change in command, and the new commander was looking for his assistant, which would be called the first vice commander. So I took that job and had it for many years. he wanted to give that up, and I took it over. I became the commander of the post around 2017 or something like that, before COVID. Mm-hmm. And during that time frame, we had a couple hundred members of the post, but not that many were active coming out to meetings and everything. But we had a group of probably 12 to 18 people with some interest in everything. We started a thing called Sons of the American Legion, and we created something of our own called Friends of the American Legion, and we met every Friday morning for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And that was the key to our success, because most posts just meet once a month at night, and it's hard to get anything accomplished. Mm-hmm. We were meeting once a week, and we had young people in the Friends and young people in the Sons. They had energy.
And what was your goal?
The goal was just to help veterans in any way we could, but we hadn't decided exactly how to do that. Then one day we heard a veteran through the senior center who was having a financial problem. Mm-hmm. He had bills he couldn't pay. And we thought maybe we could pay the bills for him. And a lady that ran the, what was it called, the city, it wasn't the city council.
Chamber of Commerce?
No, I'll think of it in a minute. At any rate, she handled all the charities in the town. The Community Foundation.
Okay. Oh, okay.
She said, here's this guy's name I found out has problems. Maybe you could solve them. Mm. So she gave us the idea. We paid his bills. Then somebody had the idea we could do that if we could just find out who the veterans are that have the problem. Mm-hmm. So we thought we'd use the senior center and the police department, and they'd give us the leads. We got no leads from them. Mm-hmm. This is the hard part of doing help for veterans, is finding out who they are. Yeah. So in Tustin, there was a thing called the Tyranny Center, and that's where all the veterans in Orange County would go for help with VA mortgages, financial problems, health problems, how to get connected into the network to go to the VA, all these things. So we found out the one guy that they went to with financial problems was in the American Legion, but he was with the Newport Beach post. So we recruited him to our post. Mm-hmm. And then one of our members was an expert at fundraising through golf tournaments. He knew how to do it. Mm-hmm. He'd done it for years with Toyota. He was in charge of their golf tournaments. So I had the fundraising mechanism and the guy who found out who had problems financially. And from 2018 to the time I left, we paid bills equal to $250,000.
Is it still going on?
Which is why I got
Is it still going on?
Yes. I don't know what they're up to now.
Show us this beautiful piece. It's just quite incredible.
This was an award by...
You can hold it this way. Let me have your water bottle for a second. Yeah.
This was an award by the district attorney for Orange County and the assemblyman for the 68th District, California government. And
what is it?
This was in recognition of that achievement, and I didn't do it alone. Mm-hmm. I could not have done it without tremendous help from a lot of people.
Yeah, but you were the leader.
Yeah, I was in charge of it, but it was definitely a group deal.
Where do you put that in? Were you aware that you were going to be getting this?
No, totally surprised.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. And then also show the certificate of recognition. This was presented to Commander Ivan Bishop in recognition of Veteran of the Year. Congratulations for your outstanding public service. Your hard work and dedication in serving the residents of Orange County is commendable. Best wishes for continued success. On the 11th day of November 2020, Todd Spitzer, Orange County District Attorney. Well, congratulations. I mean, how much you did for so many people.
They're still doing it.
And they're still doing it.
They didn't need me to keep doing it.
But what a wonderful thing to be a part of.
Yes.
To be a part of a program that you built and that continues to this day. That's a pretty powerful thing. This is something else that you did. If I may,
Yes,
show
please.
this. This is called Sea Power, and it's the strategic history of the Navy and reflections on naval service. And this is a lecture that you gave in October 24th during the Obama administration. So it would have been in the early 2000s, probably.
No, I'd say later 2000s, maybe into early teens. I don't know why they didn't put the year on there, because it didn't matter. They were promoting it for the following October.
Well, I'd like to read this, if I may.
Sure.
Ivan Bishop, a U.S. Navy veteran, lectures on the evolution of sea power and its future speculations. He shares his contributions and experiences during the mid-1960s and will speak about how to become a commissioned officer in the Navy. Ivan Bishop currently serves as first vice commander at the Tustin Post of the American Legion. And what was this lecture about? Why was this so important?
I get into the history of sea power starting in the 1500s after Columbus discovered America. And all the countries facing the Atlantic, which would be Portugal, Spain, France, the Dutch, and the English, all of a sudden realized the potential of this new world. This is a whole new thing because Columbus came back and told all the stories. So everybody had a different agenda, but Spain wanted to colonize, England wanted to trade, everybody had a different mission in mind. And that transition over from 1500 to today went from several hands, starting with Spain. They had the initiative and the experience to go with, because they sponsored Columbus. So they immediately started shipbuilding. And the word finally spread with the other countries, and they started their shipbuilding. And this is wooden ships and iron men. And a lot of those ships went to the bottom because of weather, and they weren't very big, and it was a tough time to be a sailor. And these weren't organized navies. These were just people given enough money to finance the trip and then being told that they could share in the wealth. And that led to some piracy. England authorized some ship captains to capture Spanish ships and take their gold, and if they did and brought it back, they'd get some of the gold. There was all kinds of stuff going on. The slave trade began because England wanted to trade, and the ship captains, being independent, thought, we'll pick up slaves and trade them for sugar when we get to the colonies. And sugar was in high demand in England, so some of this isn't a pretty picture. But over the years, that leadership in the oceans changed through fighting on the oceans and fighting on land, and who could raise the most money to build the ships. And the advantage in the long term went to England because of geography. Being an island, they didn't have to have the massive standing armies that the French and the Germans and all the other countries, because they were constantly having wars. And they had to have huge standing armies, which meant huge bunches of horses. The horses had to eat, the soldiers had to eat, cannons had to be built. And they didn't have enough money to always be shipbuilding. England did, because they didn't have to have those standing armies. So eventually the British Navy did eventually control the oceans. But there was a time that it was the Dutch and a time that it was the Spanish. Portugal never dominated, but they colonized. And there's still Portuguese spoken in some South American countries. But at any rate, I get into the history of that. And we wind up in World War II, and our Navy got so big to win World War II because the Pacific Ocean is so huge that it took a massive amount of Navy for us to fight Japan and eventually defeat them. If you look at a globe, the Pacific Ocean is half of our planet. And 72% of our planet is ocean, not land. 72%. And there was a time that 1/5 of all the land was the British Empire. 1/5 of everything. That would be Canada, Australia, South Africa, India. They had all of that because of the British Navy. And there was a lot of wealth in London because they were trading all the time. And their trade with America turned out to put them in good financial position in London. But everything has to come to an end, and British lost their sea power control just before World War I. They were going broke. The Boer Wars in South Africa were costing a ton of money. The treasury was kaput, and the citizens didn't want war. They wanted what we would call Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So they pulled in their horns and ceded the Western Pacific to Japan, who was an ally, and the Eastern Pacific, the Western Pacific, the Eastern Pacific to us, and the Western Atlantic, the Eastern Atlantic to us, and then they would concentrate on defending the North Sea. And the reason for that is Germany was on the march. They wanted to do what England had done. They were going to break out through the North Sea and try to colonize, and Japan was going to do the same in that part of the Pacific. So I get into all that history of how that happened and what was motivating people, and then I go through what happened on the oceans in World War I, and then eventually in World War II. I get into all the details. It's an hour and a half long.
Yeah, and the conclusion at the end, just because in terms of time for our interview, the conclusion that's so important is where we are today.
The conclusion is I reveal the shortage of Navy ships versus the power of China and their shipbuilding, which is awesome. And their Navy's now bigger than ours. It wasn't at the time I did the seminar, but they were about on a par. And one of the problems is our politicians are short-sighted. They don't see the Navy problem, and they don't understand the China threat. Now I'm into opinion. Didn't mean to get into opinion so much.
But this was.
But at any rate, that's what I get into at the end.
One of the points of your lecture.
Yeah, the point of my lecture is to let people know we have a problem, and you can think a little longer before you vote for somebody. Find out how they feel about the Navy.
Well, it's kind of like World War II and before in World War I, rather, how our government and our military didn't see the benefit of air war, of the air battles or the air power, right?
Well,
it takes time for people to.
The problem after World War I is every politician thought there would never be another war.
Yeah, right.
And the U.S. politicians said there may be, but we ain't going to participate in the next one. And we were very unprepared for World War II. It was just a joke.
In fact, a question I'm going to ask here at the end, because it's such a great little story, is this aircraft carrier that you were the oiler ship for was named the Shangri-La, and there's a little cute story about why. Is that right?
Yes.
Could you tell that little story?
I forgot about that, yeah. Most everybody has heard that after Pearl Harbor, the American public wanted some hope, some success story. So they cooked up a deal that amounted almost to a suicide mission, and that is they recruited volunteer pilots to fly long-range bombers off of aircraft carriers, knowing that they could not return. It's called the Doolittle Raid because he was in charge. So these carriers go across the ocean as far as they can. They get within range of Japan, and these long-range bombers go off not knowing that they could ever come back, but hoping that they would land in China, who was our ally at the time, and hoping they wouldn't land in Japanese hands. Some got lucky, some didn't. But the truth is they dropped a lot of bombs on Tokyo. Now, they didn't do that much damage, but the psychological thing for the U.S. citizen was great. You know, hey, we did something wonderful. But the press thought, wait a minute, we have no bases anywhere near there. How in the heck did you get long-range bombers over Tokyo? So they go to the White House and demand an interview with Roosevelt. And he had that cigarette holder that was about that long. Remember the pictures of him? And he always had it at a jaunty angle when he was smoking a cigarette, and the press was hounding him. And they said, "Where did those bombers come from?" And he said, "From our secret base in Shangri-La."
That is a great story.
So
That's a
they named
great
the next
story.
carrier
So
after
they named the next carrier that came out was named Shangri-La. Now, you have children?
Two, a son in San Francisco and a daughter that we followed up here.
Okay, so you have grandchildren.
Three, one son in San Francisco and two here.
Okay, so your family's growing.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to ask a question to maybe think about for a second that you might like to add to the final part of the interview today. And that is that you went into the military, you made a choice to go in following college into the Navy because you wanted to see the world. And you gave to our country, you gave those years of your life to our country. You were very young, and from what you've said, you learned a great deal during those years. How did those years and what you learned, how did they help you become the man that you are today?
The rapid maturity, when I went in, basically I was just a college kid that had, my only interest in college was having fun and getting a degree. Mm-hmm. But because of the responsibilities, I matured greatly, got a lot of experience about handling problems and leadership and dealing with people. And that translated into having success later on. And it particularly helped me get through graduate school with, perfect record, all A's, teaching assistant, all that stuff, because of maturity. And I was going through graduate school with kids that had just gotten out with their bachelor's degrees. They didn't have any maturity. I had tons of maturity.
Yeah.
And then later, my resume carried the day getting work. And the company that hired me was more interested in my naval experience than my degree. They didn't care if I had a degree. I had the naval experience to call on that customer to sell a giant computer.
My gosh. Yeah.
I've found that that experience carried the day a lot of times.
Well, we are so grateful to you for being an American veteran, and serving our country, giving us years of your life to be prepared to protect this country at any time. And I'm just very grateful that you benefited so tremendously from those years that you gave to this country. That's always a definite plus when that happens. So thank you for coming here today. Really an honor to spend this time with you and learn about your background, your history, and we hope you'll come back and see us a lot at the Warhawk Air Museum.
Well, I plan to be here every Tuesday.
Yes.
Except next month I'm having Mohs surgery on my skin cancer.
Okay.
I had the unfortunate experience of having all my ancestors from Ireland, Scotland, and England, meaning pale. Then I grew up in Texas, lived in Tucson, Arizona, and Southern California.
Sunshine States, yeah.
So I was constantly in the sun. And in the Navy, it would hit me from the sun, and then it'd bounce off the water and hit me again. And there was no sunscreen in 1964.
Well, I think you look pretty darn good myself. Thank you again. It's been an honor.
Thank you. I've enjoyed doing it.